winter 1945, the strategical map showed a steadily increasing strain on the enemy's war machine. But the machine was by no means broken. The Germans were resisting stubbornly on both banks of the Rhine, along the Po Valley in Italy. On the eastern front, they were grouped round Budapest, and they stood along the river line of the Vistula and in the Junker Bastion of East Prussia. The Nazis were still fostering illusions behind the fighting lines. Goebbels' propaganda took a curious mystical turn, and Hitler still boasted of his fanatical will. But there were some who doubted, and some who hoped for a miracle. German war maps were shrinking, and German generals argued over them. But the secrets of the coming combined Allied attack remained hidden. Workers in the vast Ural factories sent to the Soviet fronts a steady reinforcement of guns and tanks and planes. American bombers and fighter planes took the Alaska route to Russia, and traffic along the new highway became a torrent. One consignment alone was of 150,000 trucks. Armored vehicles, petrol and oil and ammunition poured along this road for shipment to the Soviet Union. And 15,000 miles away, there was the Persia Railway, where British and American war supplies were now rolling freely north to Russia. And another vital route to our Soviet allies was through the icy waters of the Arctic. Along the coast of Norway and through the Barents Sea, British and Allied convoys fought the U-boat packs and the German bombers to bring their priceless cargoes to Murmansk. Of January. This was the day the Red Army struck. The initial blow was tremendous. Baltic to the Vistula, the whole front was on the move. On the northern flank, the 2nd and 3rd White Russian armies broke deep into East Prussia. Tilsit was captured. And the Red Army took Allenstein, the ancient stronghold of the Teutonic Knights with its medieval towers. And at Tannenberg, they overran the battlefield of 1914 with the Hindenburg Memorial. Then through Upper Silesia. Once again, the tradition was justified. General January and General February are always allies of Russia. And it's no use the German posters saying hush when the Red Army has arrived. The arsenals and coal fields of Upper Silesia were second only to the Ruhr, and the whole area was now isolated and bypassed. Krakow was liberated by Marshal Konev's forces, and as the Russians entered this ancient capital of Poland, the Polish trumpeter sounded the traditional call of victory. Then Germany itself, dead town and dead streets. Rokossovsky's armies followed the course of the Oder clear through to the Baltic coast, capturing German shipping and cutting off 20 divisions round Königsberg. By January the 27th, the 14th day of the Great Winter Offensive, the Red Army had everywhere driven the Germans back to a great depth. Berlin was nearer by 250 miles. In the west, Eisenhower had already given his orders to the Allied Air Staff, British Air Marshal Tedder, American Generals Sparks and Eaker, and Air Marshal Harris, Chief of RAF Bomber Command. The orders were destroy all railways, troop concentrations, industries, and airfields. The result was unparalleled devastation, a series of crippling blows to enemy supply lines and to his whole communication system. In the middle of January, the land offensive began. Montgomery's 21st Army Group led the attack with specialized tactics and amphibious craft to deal with the widespread floods. The British and Canadian forces started out from their positions round Sittard in Holland. Their first task was to break the northern German defences and to create an exposed flank. Rheinenkirchen and Ruhrmund, the stubborn resistance was broken, and by February the 13th, the key position of the Reichswald forest was cleared by British troops. Kalkar was stormed and Goch taken. Ten days later, on February the 23rd, the American Ninth Army crossed the swollen Ruhr River to extend the breach. The Germans fought fiercely, but in 24 hours they crumbled. The Ninth Army fought its way forward now into town after town of the Rhine industrial area. Krefeld, Mönchengladbach, and Venlo were taken in turn. In the middle of March, the American troops linked up with the Canadians at Neuss, and together they eliminated the last western enemy bridgehead in the northern sector. Meanwhile, the American 3rd and 1st Armies had struck farther south. Rundstedt attempted to retreat across the Rhine, but in the confusion, one vital bridge was left intact, the bridge at Remagen. This was the sort of fortunate chance that war rarely offers. Eisenhower seized his opportunity with both hands. Very swiftly he made a redisposition of his forces and loosed Patton's 3rd Army across the bridge straight into southern Germany. Before many days passed, the bridge collapsed, but it lasted long enough to allow American armor to pour across into central Germany and spread panic and disorder in the enemy rear. "60,000 prisoners gave themselves up in one day. 10 German divisions were bluffed and isolated and immobilized. Meanwhile, under a wide smoke screen, Montgomery's 21st Army Group were making massive preparations to cross the lower Rhine. This was a vital point. Success here on the northern plains meant opening the historic corridor straight to Berlin in the heart of Prussia. Multitudes of assault boats and landing craft of every kind were ferried from Antwerp down the canals of Holland to assembly points along the Rhine. The Royal Navy joined in, and the sailors brought their great landing barges across country. A terrific bombardment opened the assault. Planes and rocket-firing tanks and guns systematically smashed the German defenses on the eastern bank. Then came the assault. At 21 hours on the 23rd of March, 21st Army Group crossed the Rhine in force. Hitler will find no peace, no rest, no halting place, no parley. Those were Churchill's own words, and he himself was there to see the crossing of the Rhine, Germany's last defensive barrier. As soon as the bridgehead was secured, a force of 40,000 airborne troops and paratroops was dropped behind the enemy lines. Their task was to hold a commanding ridge and to smash communications. lesson of Arnhem was not forgotten. The airborne troops were not dropped too far ahead. Contact with the ground troops was made quickly. But this great operation was not made without loss. Casualties were high. Of the British forces alone, 37 gliders were burned out, and most of the others were hit by light arms fire or were damaged on landing. But nothing would stop the men when they got there, and these airborne troops turned enemy organized resistance into a rout. The Royal Engineers broke even their own records in bridge making, and 21st Army Group pushed on. British and American armor swept forward on a wide front, and after 3 days, only shattered German units were left to make for the Elbe. With cohesion almost completely lost, independent German groups fought stubbornly for each town. As far as the German command could still be thought to possess a plan, it was to hold the northern ports for a possible retreat to Norway. But a swift stroke by the 1st British Commando and a mixed airborne force broke into Hamburg. Then the armor went in, pioneered by bulldozers clearing the mountains of rubble, and this great port, the second city in all Germany, was in British hands. Bremen fell. The famous Focke-Wulf works were taken together with their complete organization and their expert staff. And then came another great American thrust by the 3rd and 9th Armies. The whole war industrial area was encircled, and 150,000 enemy troops were trapped in the ruined city. Leipzig, the great Saxon capital, in these later stages was a German defensive base against the advancing Red Army. It was subjected by the Allied Air Force to one of the fiercest bombardments of the war, and then the American Third Army captured it after a lightning advance through Saxony. Then the French First Army and the American 7th entered Nuremberg. This rallying ground of the Nazi Party was made the scene of the first Allied victory parade. Deeper still in the south, another American army crossed the Danube and captured Munich. The notorious beer cellar still stood. The town itself was a shapeless ruin. And finally, Berchtesgaden, Hitler's eagle's nest, was pinpointed by Allied bombers and overrun. And with its capture, the Nazi plans for a stand in the mountain redoubt were finally shattered. Nothing could now avert collapse, though when it came, it was swifter and more complete than could ever have been anticipated. The stream of surrender thickened. Every day brought nearer the ultimate huge total of 4 million prisoners. came in their thousands to give up their arms. Veterans and raw recruits, old and young, they had had enough. In Italy, on May the 2nd, the Allied forces under General Alexander began their own last offensive. They broke through the mountain barriers and overran the plain of the Po. And the Italian partisans rose with them, and they dominated large areas of northern Italy. Three forces of Poles and Frenchmen, and Italians and Yugoslavs, and many other nationalities took a significant part in this final triumph. Milan was taken, and Genoa, and Turin. Mussolini's end had come. In the name of the people, he was executed and his body exposed to public execration in Milan. The cynical creed that he'd fostered died where it was born. Then came the closing scene. On behalf of more than 1 million Germans still in arms in Italy, two plenipotentiaries in civilian clothes to dodge Himmler's agents signed the document of surrender. In the east, early in 1945, the southern Red armies advanced along both sides of the Danube and encircled Budapest. The Germans meant to hold this city at all costs as a shield against the invasion of Austria. The Danube divided the town in two, and the Russians fought through Pest to take Buda on the opposite bank. Marshal Tordukin with the 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian armies was in charge of operations. There was terrific house-to-house fighting. The Germans refused to surrender, turned every house into a strong point, and fought it out block by block. Russian official communiques were very simple. January the 5th, our troops took a further 233 blocks of houses. January the 6th, 173 blocks. January the 8th, 130 blocks. January the 10th, things moved more quickly, 1,000 blocks. The Germans made a desperate attempt to supply the city by transport planes. It was defeated. And on January the 20th, Hungary sought an armistice in Moscow. On February the 13th, the last block fell to the Red Army. What was left of the German forces in Budapest surrendered. Tordukin's armies regrouped and pressed on. The scene shifted to Czechoslovakia, where the citizens of Prague rose against their oppressors. Liberation armies of the United States from the west and from the Soviet Union from the east were approaching, but the citizens were determined that Bohemia would not be turned into a redoubt. The Prague police chief broadcast the position within the city, and after 3 days fighting, a Soviet column entered from the northwest, and Prague was free. Next, Vienna, the historic city on the Danube, was the objective for the Soviet Army of the South. The fate of this great capital was decided in the Danube woods. There was stiff fighting round the Schönbrunn Palace and in the center of the city. Here was the house of Mozart, and here it was that Hitler once stood and said how much he loved Austria. The music of Strauss was inspired by these woods. As fighting receded from each district, the citizens tried to set things to rights. Life has returned to Vienna after 8 years of darkness, and the people rejoice over their newborn liberty. And now came the real climax of Allied two-front strategy. What had always scared the German High Command became a reality, and that was the link-up of the Allied armies. Montgomery's British soldiers and Rokossovsky's Russians met near Wismar on the Baltic, and on the 26th of April, American and Russian fighting men made contact at Torgau on the Elbe. Berlin was now the supreme target. It was encircled by the Red Army on all sides, and it was bombed ceaselessly by British and American heavy forces for 31 nights and 31 days. Marshal Zhukov and Konev issued the order for the final assaults at the beginning of April. Nightmare fighting took place in these rubble heaps and in the cellars and the bolt holes of the wrecked city. Fighting went on in the underground railway tunnels lit by searchlights till its passages were choked with SS dead. The 2nd of May, Berlin fell. And among the men who listened to the victory order of the day were veterans of Moscow and Stalingrad and Leningrad and of the great fighting advance from the Volga. Now at last the Red Army gathered the fruits of endurance and leadership. Now the surrenders began. Admiral General von Friedeberg signed the surrender of all German forces in northwest Germany and Holland and Denmark. For Field Marshal Montgomery, this was the victorious end of a march from Alamein to the Elbe. At Rheims, Friedeberg with Jodl confirmed Germany's total defeat and surrender. Beadle Smith represented Eisenhower. The ceremony took 6 minutes, and then the formal full-dress ratification was signed by Field Marshal Keitel in Berlin. Eisenhower, Zhukov, Tedder, and de Lafte-Tassigny represented the Allied armies. It was now the turn of the outposts. Norway, Air Commodore Darvell conducted the official and very formal ceremony with Colonel Koch. On the destroyer Bulldog, Major General Rhine gave up the Channel Islands. With Germany's military defeat, the Allies assumed responsibility for administration, and a zoning conference was held in Berlin. General Eisenhower presented to his colleagues the pens used at the surrender. All the leaders of the conspiracy were now either dead or captured. Himmler took this way out. For Admiral Dönitz, Nazi ruler in the last hours, the brief spell of power was over. He and his fanatics bear the responsibility for prolonging the war by means of undersea weapons long after the issue was in fact decided. Papen, Kesselring, Rundstedt. Goering put his case to the press with a certain extravagance. Goering's successor had left Luftwaffe affairs in confusion. He was appointed in March. He killed himself in May. And most of what remained of the Luftwaffe itself by then was lying mangled on the German airfield. One by one, the Allies took possession of everything with which the Germans had planned to conquer the world. The V weapon. The the naval equipment in German ports. At Kiel, first and last target of the RAF, there were the derelict battleships and their auxiliaries. Other ships, like the cruiser Prince Eugen, were captured in fighting trim. Elsewhere there were masses of war material of the land army, then U-boats half-built and others ready in their pen, and the latest undersea weapons manned by so-called suicide crews. It was some time before the U-boats at sea heard of the surrender. 120 of them came in singly over several weeks. The Royal Navy sailed the U-boat up the Thames past Tower Bridge, and this was above all a symbol of victory for the people of London.